The ink on the divorce papers was barely dry when my husband Richard looked across the mahogany conference table and laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was a cold, sharp sound, like glass breaking. "You know, Sarah," he said, checking his Rolex, a watch I had bought him for our 10th anniversary with money I saved from grocery budgets. "I almost feel bad for you. You're 42 years old. You have no job experience. You have no skills. And now, thanks to that prenup you so obediently signed 20 years ago, you have no money." He stood up, buttoning his $5,000 Italian suit jacket. His lawyer, a man named Mr. Stone, who looked like a vulture in a tie, smirked at me. "I'm keeping the house," Richard continued, ticking off items on his fingers. "I'm keeping the cars. I'm keeping the company. And you? You get the guest cottage in the country. If you can afford the property taxes, which, let's be honest, you can't." He leaned over the table, invading my personal space. I could smell his cologne, Santal 33. The same scent his 24-year-old assistant, Jessica, wore. He didn't even try to hide it anymore. "You were a good starter wife, Sarah," he whispered, loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. "You kept the house clean. You raised a decent son. But let's face it, you've aged out of the role. I need someone who matches my trajectory." My lawyer, a court-appointed junior associate who looked terrified of Richard, started to say something, but I placed a hand on his arm to silence him. I looked at Richard. I looked at the man I had loved for 22 years, the man I had nursed through pneumonia, the man whose business plans I had proofread at 3 a.m. when he was just a broke dreamer in a garage, the man who was now throwing me away like a used tissue because he found a shinier version. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I reached into my purse, a sensible 3-year-old leather bag, and pulled out a single, small, silver flash drive. I placed it gently on the polished table. The metal made a soft clink sound that seemed to echo in the silent room. "Richard," I said softly. My voice was steady. It surprised even me. "Do you remember what you told me on our honeymoon? You said, 'Sarah, you're the only person I trust with my life.'" He frowned, looking at the flash drive. "What is this? Some sentimental photo slideshow? I don't have time for nostalgia." "No," I smiled. It was a small, sad smile. "This isn't nostalgia. This is insurance." I stood up slowly. "You see, Richard, you're right. I don't have a job title. I don't have a salary. But for 20 years, while you were busy being the visionary, who do you think was handling the passwords? Who do you think was organizing the digital archives? Who do you think managed the private keys to your offshore cryptocurrency wallets when you lost the codes in 2018? Richard's face went from arrogant to pale in less than a second. His eyes locked onto the silver drive. "That drive," I continued, picking up my purse, "contains the only copy of the decryption keys for your accounts in the Cayman Islands, the ones holding, what is it today, $45 million? Mr. Stone, his lawyer, dropped his pen. "Mr. Sterling, what is she talking about?" "And Richard?" I added, walking to the door. "I changed the encryption password this morning, while you were in the shower with Jessica." I opened the heavy oak door. "You can keep the house. You can keep the cars. You can even keep Jessica. But if you ever want to access your money again, you're going to have to negotiate with the starter wife." I walked out of the conference room. Behind me, I heard Richard scream my name. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated panic. And for the first time in years, I felt alive. Hello, everyone. I'm Sarah. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever been told you weren't enough, leave a yes in the comments. I want to know I'm not alone. And hit that subscribe button, because the war I'm about to describe, it's just getting started. But to understand the end, we have to go back. Not 20 years, but just 2. 2 years ago, on a Tuesday that seemed like any other Tuesday, I was living the life everyone envied. We lived in a sprawling estate in Connecticut, 6 bedrooms, a pool, a tennis court I never used, and a garden that required 3 full-time landscapers. I was Mrs. Richard Sterling. My husband was the CEO of Sterling Tech, a logistics software company that had just gone public. From the outside, I was the perfect trophy wife. I hosted the charity galas. I managed the household staff. I made sure Richard's shirts were starched exactly the way he liked. I was thin, well-groomed, and silent. That was my job, to be decorative, to be supportive, to be silent. But silence allows you to hear things, and invisibility allows you to see things. That Tuesday, I was in Richard's home office. I wasn't snooping, I was dusting. The cleaning lady was sick, and Richard hated dust. He said it clogged his thoughts. So there I was, wiping down his mahogany shelves, when his iPad lit up on the desk. It was a notification, a text message. From Jessica, work. Message. He's asleep. I miss you. Can't wait for Paris next week. Did you tell the old ball and chain you're going for a conference yet? The old ball and chain. I stared at the screen. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. Instead, the world just stopped. It felt like all the air had been sucked out of the room. Jessica. I knew her. She was his new executive assistant, fresh out of college, 24 years old, blonde, bubbly. She looked at Richard like he was a god. I had even sent her a birthday card last month because Richard asked me to. Paris. He had told me he was going to a tech summit in Berlin. He had made me pack his bags. He had made me buy him new adapters for Germany. I sat down in his leather chair, the chair that cost more than my first car. I unlocked the iPad. He hadn't changed the passcode. It was our wedding anniversary, 10/14. The irony was nauseating. I opened the messages, and there it was. Not just a fling, a whole parallel life. Photos of them in restaurants I'd always wanted to try. Photos of her wearing jewelry I recognized from the credit card bills. Bills, he told me, were for client gifts. Messages mocking me, mocking my cooking, mocking my clothes, mocking the fact that I was getting wrinkles. Richard, don't worry, babe. The divorce is coming. I just need to move some assets first so she doesn't get half. I'm not letting that leech take my hard-earned money. Leech. I had met Richard when we were both students. I worked 2 jobs as a waitress to pay our rent while he coded his first software. I paid for the servers. I paid for the electricity. I fed him. I clothed him. When he gave up, I was the one who pushed him to keep going. And now, I was a leech. I scrolled back. Months? Years? No, about 8 months. Then I saw something else. Something that frightened me more than the affair. Richard, I moved the liquid cash to the crypto wallet. The IRS can't touch it there, and neither can Sarah. It's totally off the books. Jessica, you're so smart, baby. How much? Richard, about 12 million right now, aiming for 50 before I serve her the papers. He wasn't just cheating on me sexually, he was cheating me financially. He was siphoning money out of our joint assets, money we had built together, and hiding it in offshore accounts and cryptocurrency so that when he divorced me, I would be left with nothing but the official accounts, which were likely drained or debt-ridden. He was planning to leave me destitute. I put the iPad down. I looked out the window at the perfectly manicured lawn. I thought about my son, Leo, who was away at college. Leo, who idolized his father. If I confronted Richard now, he would deny it. He would lock me out of the accounts. He would hide the money better. He would hire the best lawyers in the country and crush me. I had access to the checking account for groceries, but I didn't have access to the real money. I realized then that I had been a fool. I had trusted him completely. I had let him handle the finances because he was the genius. But I remembered something from 20 years ago. Before I met Richard, before I was a housewife, I had a life. I was a math major. I was good with numbers. I was good with patterns. I had given up my career to support his, but my brain hadn't atrophied. It had just been dormant. I wiped the iPad down to remove my fingerprints. I placed it exactly where it had been. I picked up my duster. I finished cleaning the office. That night, when Richard came home, I kissed him on the cheek. I asked him about his day. I served him roast chicken. "You seem quiet tonight, Sarah," he said, chewing with his mouth open, a habit he only revealed at home. "Just a headache," I smiled. "Excited for your trip to Berlin?" "Oh, very," he said without batting an eye. "Important meetings, very technical." "I'll make sure to pack your warm coat," I said. Inside, I was screaming, but on the outside, I was the perfect, oblivious wife. The next morning, as soon as Richard left for work, the real work began. I didn't panic. I planned. I knew Richard. He was arrogant. He was sloppy because he thought he was untouchable. He thought I was stupid, and that was my greatest weapon. I went to his home office. I didn't try to hack his computer. That would leave a digital footprint. Instead, I looked for physical backups. Richard didn't trust the cloud completely. He was paranoid about hackers. He always kept a cold storage backup of his most important data. I searched the safe. I knew the combination: his birthday. Inside were passports, deeds, some cash, but no hard drives. I searched his desk. Nothing. Then I remembered. The library. Richard had a fake hollow book. It was a cliché, but Richard loved clichés. He thought they were classic. It was a copy of Atlas Shrugged. He loved that book. He quoted it constantly to justify his greed. I went to the library shelves. I pulled down Atlas Shrugged. It was heavy. I opened it. Inside, cut into the pages, was a small black notebook and a USB drive. My hands trembled as I took them out. I took the notebook to the kitchen table. It was filled with strings of random words: sunset, velvet, horizon, blue. To anyone else, it looked like gibberish or bad poetry, but I knew what it was: seed phrases, recovery phrases for cryptocurrency wallets. Richard was smart enough to write them down, but dumb enough to keep them in his house. I didn't take the notebook. If it went missing, he would know. Instead, I took photos of every single page with my phone. Then I put the notebook back exactly as I found it. Then I took the USB drive. I plugged it into my old laptop, an ancient thing I used for recipes. It was encrypted, of course. But here's the thing about Richard. He was a creature of habit. He thought he was complex, but he was simple. He used variations of the same 3 passwords for everything: his first car's license plate, his mother's maiden name, and the date he made his first million. I tried the license plate. Access denied. I tried the mother's name. Access denied. I tried the date. Access denied. I paused. Maybe he had changed? Maybe Jessica had taught him better security. Then I thought about his ego. Richard loved Richard. What was the most important thing in the world to him? Himself, and his legacy. I typed in, Sterling Empire 1, access granted. I almost laughed. It was pathetic. I opened the files. It was all there. The Berlin trip wasn't a conference. It was a meeting with a shell company lawyer to move assets out of U.S. jurisdiction. There were emails drafting divorce papers dated 6 months ago. There were plans to sell our house and lease it back to a company owned by Jessica so I would be evicted. It was evil. It was calculated. It was thorough. I copied everything, every file, every email, every bank statement. Then I put the USB drive back in the book. I had the information, but information wasn't power. Not yet. If I revealed I knew now, he would just change the passwords and hide the money somewhere else. I needed control. I needed to move the money before he did, but I couldn't just steal it. That would be illegal. I would go to jail. I needed to make him give it to me, or, better yet, I needed to lock it away where only I could reach it and hold it hostage. I spent the next week studying crypto. I watched tutorials on YouTube. I read forums on the dark web. I learned about multi-sig wallets, wallets that require multiple keys to open. I formulated a plan. It was dangerous. If I messed up, I would lose everything. Richard went to Berlin, Paris, with Jessica. I stayed home. While he was eating croissants by the Seine with his mistress, I was executing a digital heist from his home office in Connecticut. I used the seed phrases from his notebook to access his wallets. I didn't move the money. That would trigger an alert. Instead, I changed the security settings. I set up a time-lock smart contract. It's a piece of code that says, these funds cannot be moved or accessed without a specific digital key. I created that key. I encrypted it, and I put it on a single silver flash drive. Then, I deleted the original access methods. Essentially, I changed the locks on his bank vault while he was on vacation. He could still see the money. He could see the balance growing, but he couldn't withdraw a cent. Not without my key. When Richard came back from Paris, he was glowing. He brought me a box of duty-free chocolates. German chocolate, he lied. They were French. The label said, Fabriqué en France. He didn't even check. Did you have a good trip? I asked. Productive, he said, kissing my forehead. Very productive. He went straight to his office. I held my breath. Would he check the accounts? He came out 10 minutes later, looking relaxed. He hadn't tried to withdraw anything. He just checked the balance. The number was there, so he thought he was safe. He had no idea he was looking at a mirage. For the next 18 months, I played the part. I was the dutiful wife. I hosted his parties. I smiled at Jessica when she came to the house to drop off papers. I watched them touch hands when they thought I wasn't looking. It was torture. Every day I wanted to scream. Every day I wanted to throw his coffee in his face. But I had a goal. I needed to build my own safety net. I couldn't touch the millions in the crypto wallet yet. I needed cash. I started siphoning money from the household budget. Richard gave me a generous allowance for house expenses, $10,000 a month for groceries, staff, maintenance. I fired the expensive landscapers and hired local students for half the price. I started buying generic brands and putting them in expensive jars. I learned to do minor repairs myself instead of calling the plumber. I saved $4,000 a month. In 18 months, I had $72,000 in a secret account under my maiden name. It wasn't millions, but it was running away money. I also started educating myself. I took online courses in forensic accounting. I learned about divorce law. I prepared. And then, it happened. The timeline accelerated. Richard came home one Friday evening looking manic. "Sarah, sit down," he said. He didn't even wait for dinner. "I'm selling the house," he announced. "What?" I asked, genuinely surprised. "Why?" "Market is peaking," he lied. "We're going to downsize, rent a condo in the city. It's better for business." I knew what this meant. He was liquidating the physical assets. He was turning the house into cash so he could hide that too. Once we were in a rental, he would file for divorce and leave me on the street. "When?" I asked. "Realtor is coming tomorrow. Start packing." He was moving fast. Too fast. I couldn't let him sell the house. If he sold the house, that was $5 million in equity he would steal. I had to trigger the trap. "Richard," I said, standing up. "No." He looked at me like the toaster had just spoken to him. "Excuse me?" I said, "No, I'm not moving. This is my home. Leo grew up here." Richard laughed. "It's my house, Sarah. My name is on the deed. You signed a quitclaim deed 10 years ago, remember? For liability protection?" I remembered. He had tricked me then, too. "I don't care," I said. "I'm not leaving." His eyes went cold. "You don't have a choice. Now be a good girl and start packing the china. Or I'll have the movers pack it for you and they break things." He walked away. That night, I called the divorce lawyer I had secretly consulted months ago. A court-appointed one because I couldn't show that I had money. "It's time," I told him. "File the papers, but do it quietly. I want to serve him at the office." 2 days later, Richard was served with divorce papers in front of his entire board of directors. He came home in a rage. He kicked the front door open. "You think you can fight me?" he screamed. "You think you can win? I will destroy you, Sarah. I will leave you with nothing." That brings us back to the conference room, to the moment I put the flash drive on the table. Because what Richard didn't know, what he was about to find out, was that his war chest, his secret millions, his escape plan, it belonged to me now. I walked down the hallway of the law firm, my heels clicking rhythmically on the marble floor. Behind me, the heavy oak door of the conference room muffled the sounds of chaos, but I could still hear Richard's voice rising in pitch. It wasn't the commanding baritone he used in boardrooms. It was the shrill, desperate sound of a man who had just realized the floor was missing beneath his feet. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I walked straight to the elevator, pressed the button for the lobby, and watched the numbers count down. For the first time in 20 years, I wasn't Richard Sterling's wife. I wasn't Leo's mother. I was just Sarah. And I was holding a nuclear football in my 3-year-old leather purse. I stepped out into the bright afternoon sun of downtown Manhattan. The air smelled of exhaust and roasted nuts from a street vendor. To me, it smelled like freedom. I hailed a cab, not a sleek Uber Black like Richard would have, but a regular yellow taxi. "Where to, lady?" the driver asked. "The airport," I lied. I wasn't going to the airport. I was going to a Motel 6 on the outskirts of New Jersey. It was the last place on earth Richard would look for me. He was a snob. He believed that people like us simply didn't exist in places with exterior corridors and vending machines. He was wrong. That was his fatal flaw. He thought money was a shield against reality. While I sat in the back of that taxi watching the city skyline recede, Richard was undoubtedly scrambling. I know exactly what happened in that conference room after I left, because Mr. Stone, his lawyer, told me later. Richard had dived for his laptop. He frantically tried to log into his main crypto exchange account. He probably typed in his usual password, Sterling Empire 1, with shaking fingers. But instead of the dashboard showing his $45 million, he would have seen a red screen. Access denied, invalid credentials. He would have tried again. And again. Sweat would have been beading on his forehead, ruining his expensive foundation. He would have turned to the backup codes, the ones he kept in the hollowed-out book. But those were useless now. I had rekeyed everything. The money was sitting right there on the blockchain, visible to anyone who knew where to look, but it was locked inside a digital fortress, and I was the only one with the key. By the time I checked into the motel room, my phone had been buzzing non-stop for an hour. 42 missed calls, 30 from Richard, 5 from his lawyer, 7 from numbers I didn't recognize. I turned the phone off and took out a burner phone I had bought with cash 3 days ago. I sent one text message to Richard's number. "Do not call me. I will call you when I am ready to negotiate. If you try to find me, I delete the key." Then I turned the burner phone off too. I lay down on the cheap, scratchy bedspread and stared at the water stains on the ceiling. I should have been terrified. I had just stolen $45 million from a man who destroyed his competitors for sport. But I wasn't scared. I felt a strange, cold calm. I had spent 2 decades managing the emotional volatility of a narcissist. I knew how to handle a tantrum. Back in the city, the reality was setting in for Richard. He couldn't go to the police. That was the beauty of my plan. If he went to the police and said, "My wife stole my crypto," he would have to explain where that money came from. He would have to explain why he had $45 million in unreported assets hidden in offshore accounts. He would have to admit to tax evasion, wire fraud, and money laundering. He was trapped. I wasn't holding his money hostage. I was holding his freedom hostage. He realized that evening that he wasn't just fighting for his fortune. He was fighting to stay out of federal prison. I spent 3 days in that motel. I ate vending machine crackers and watched daytime television. I needed him to marinate in his panic. I needed him to feel the walls closing in. On the 4th day, I turned the burner phone back on. It rang almost instantly. I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again. I answered. "Sarah!" Richard screamed. He sounded wrecked. His voice was hoarse, cracking with exhaustion. "Sarah, listen to me. This isn't a game. You have no idea who you're messing with. There are people involved in this. Dangerous people." "I know exactly who I'm messing with, Richard," I said calmly, sipping my lukewarm motel coffee. "I'm messing with a man who cheated on his wife, hid assets from the IRS, and tried to leave the mother of his child homeless. As for dangerous people, I assume you mean the investors from the shell company in Panama? The ones you laundered money for in 2019? Yes, I have those emails too. Folder B, subfolder risk. Would you like me to forward them to the FBI? Or should we talk about my settlement?" There was a long silence on the other end. I could hear his breathing. It was ragged. "What do you want?" he whispered. The arrogance was gone. The bluster was gone. He was a cornered rat. "I want everything," I said. "I want the house. I want the liquid cash in the declared accounts. I want full custody of the dog. And I want 50% of the crypto assets transferred to a clean, whitelisted wallet of my choosing. The other 50% you can keep. Consider it a consulting fee for my 20 years of service." 50%? He choked. "That's over $20 million. Sarah, be reasonable." "Reasonable?" I laughed. Reasonable was asking for a fair divorce settlement. Reasonable was expecting loyalty after I built your career. This isn't reasonable, Richard. This is the penalty phase. You have 24 hours to draft the new agreement. Mr. Stone can send it to my lawyer. If I don't see a signed draft by noon tomorrow, I release the private key to the public. Anyone on the internet will be able to take your money. It will be a digital feeding frenzy. And then I email the IRS. I hung up. I knew he would do it. He loved money, but he loved his freedom more. And he loved his reputation most of all. If this scandal broke, Sterling Tech stock would crash. He would be ruined. Giving me half was the only way to save the other half. But there was a variable I hadn't accounted for. Jessica. I found out later what happened that night at our house. My house. Richard was pacing the living room, drinking scotch straight from the bottle. Jessica was there. She had moved in the day I left, eager to mark her territory. She didn't know about the flash drive yet. She didn't know the money was gone. She just saw a stressed lover and thought she could soothe him. She walked in wearing one of my silk robes, something that made my stomach turn when I heard about it, and tried to hug him. "Baby, forget about her," she purred. "We have the company. We have the house. Who cares if she drags it out a little?" Richard snapped. The stress broke him. He pushed her away, hard. "You stupid girl," he yelled at her. "We don't have anything. She took it all. The accounts are locked. The offshore funds are gone. We are broke, Jessica. Actually, worse than broke. If she talks, I'm going to jail for 20 years. Jessica froze. The color drained from her face. She looked at Richard, really looked at him, not as the powerful CEO, but as a terrified aging man on the brink of ruin. And the calculation in her eyes shifted instantly. "What do you mean, gone?" she asked, her voice sharp. "You said you had 50 million protected." "She has the keys!" Richard screamed, throwing his glass against the fireplace. It shattered, staining the white marble I had hand-picked. "The starter wife you made fun of? She outsmarted us. She has everything." Jessica didn't comfort him. She didn't offer to help him fight. She did exactly what a parasite does when the host body begins to die. She detached. She backed away slowly. I can't be involved in this," she stammered. "If there's illegal stuff, money laundering, Richard, I'm 24. I can't go to prison. I have a life." "You're in this as deep as I am," Richard roared. "You're listed as the secretary on the shell companies." "I didn't sign anything!" Jessica shrieked. "You forged my signature. I'm leaving." She ran upstairs. 10 minutes later, she came down with 2 suitcases. She stripped off my silk robe and threw it on the floor, changing back into her own clothes. She grabbed her purse, the Birkin bag Richard had bought her with our savings, and walked out the door. She didn't look back. She didn't say goodbye. She just got into her car and drove away, leaving Richard alone in the empty, echoing mansion that was no longer his. When I heard about this later, I didn't feel triumph. I just felt a weary validation. I knew she never loved him. Richard was the only one who believed the fairy tale that a model gorgeous 20-something falls in love with a balding 50-year-old workaholic for his personality. The next day at noon, my email pinged. It was a document from Mr. Stone. Revised settlement agreement. I opened it on my laptop. It was all there. The house, the cars, the alimony, and a complex clause regarding the transfer of digital assets. He had caved. He had surrendered unconditionally. I called my court-appointed lawyer, who sounded like he was having a heart attack. "Mrs. Sterling," he stuttered, "I just received a proposal from opposing counsel. It's everything. They're giving you everything. I've never seen a capitulation like this in my career. What did you say to him?" "I just reminded him of his wedding vows," I said dryly. "For better or for worse. He decided he didn't want the worse." We set a date to sign the papers. It was to be done at a neutral location, a bank vault downtown. I would transfer the encryption key only after the legal documents were signed and filed with the court. I checked out of the motel. I put on my best suit, Not a new one, but one I had tailored myself years ago. I drove my beat-up sedan into the city. I felt different. I walked taller. People moved out of my way on the sidewalk. I wasn't the invisible housewife anymore. I was the woman who had brought a titan to his knees without raising her voice. But as I walked into the bank, I saw something that made me pause. Richard was there, of course, looking haggard and defeated. But standing next to Mr. Stone was another man, a man in a dark gray suit who didn't look like a lawyer. He looked like law enforcement, or something worse. My heart skipped a beat. Had Richard gambled? Had he decided to turn himself in just to take me down with him? If he confessed to the fraud, the money would be seized by the government. I would get nothing, and I could be charged as an accomplice since I had known about it and said nothing for 2 years. I stopped at the glass doors. I gripped my purse. The flash drive felt hot against my palm. I had to make a choice. Walk in and risk the trap, or walk away and lose the victory. I looked at Richard through the glass. He saw me. His eyes weren't angry. They were pleading. He was terrified of the man in the gray suit, too. That's when I realized the man wasn't FBI. He was worse. He was one of the investors Richard had mentioned, the dangerous people, the people whose money Richard had lost access to when I locked the wallet. They weren't here to arrest him. They were here to make sure they got paid. I took a deep breath. This was no longer just a divorce. This was a hostage negotiation. And I was the only one in the room who knew how to defuse the bomb. I pushed open the doors and walked in. The game had just changed levels, and I was all in. The air inside the bank vault was recycled and cold, kept at a constant temperature to protect the stacks of cash and safety deposit boxes lining the walls. But the chill I felt had nothing to do with the air conditioning. It came from the man in the gray suit standing next to my husband. He didn't look like a banker. He didn't look like a lawyer. He had the dead, flat eyes of a shark that had just smelled blood in the water. He was looking at me, assessing my value, calculating if I was a threat or an asset. Richard was sitting at the heavy metal table, sweating profusely. His tie was undone, his expensive shirt stained at the collar. He looked like a man who had been running for days. When I walked in, he let out a sound that was half sob, half gasp. "She has it," Richard blurted out, pointing a shaking finger at me. "She has the key. I told you. I didn't steal your money. She locked it." The man in the gray suit turned his head slowly to look at me. He didn't smile. "Mrs. Sterling," he said. His voice was gravel, deep and rough. "Your husband tells us there has been a technical difficulty with our investment fund. He says you are the IT consultant who can fix it." I almost laughed. IT consultant. That was Richard's lie. He couldn't admit to these people that his wife had outsmarted him. He had to paint me as a rogue employee or a hired gun. It was pathetic, but it gave me an opening. I walked to the table and placed my purse down. I didn't sit. Standing gave me the height advantage, however slight. "That's correct," I said, keeping my voice steady, matching the shark's flat tone. "There was a security breach. I initiated a lockdown protocol to protect the assets. The funds are safe, but unfreezing them requires a specific sequence of authorizations." I looked at Mr. Stone, the lawyer, who looked like he wanted to dissolve into the floor tiles. "And before I perform any technical services, I require my contract to be signed. The settlement agreement. Is it ready?" The shark looked at Mr. Stone. "Sign the papers," he commanded. It wasn't a suggestion. Mr. Stone pushed the stack of documents toward Richard. "Sign it, Richard," he whispered. "Just sign it." Richard grabbed the pen. He didn't read a single word. He didn't check the clauses about the house or the alimony. He just scribbled his signature on every line I pointed to. He signed away the mansion. He signed away the cars. He signed away his claim to my retirement accounts. He signed away his life, just to save his skin for another day. When he was done, I took the papers. I handed them to Mr. Stone. "File these immediately," I said. "If I don't get a confirmation email from the court clerk in 30 minutes, the key stays in my pocket." We waited. 30 minutes of silence. The shark stood by the door, watching us. Richard put his head in his hands. I sat calmly, checking my watch. Finally, Mr. Stone's phone pinged. "It's filed," he said, his voice trembling. "The judge has signed the decree. It's official. You are divorced. The settlement is binding." I nodded. Excellent. I took the silver flash drive out of my purse. I plugged it into the secure laptop Richard had brought. I typed in the decryption sequence. It was a long string of numbers, a prime factorization equation that Richard would never have been able to solve in a million years. The screen flashed green. Access granted. "The wallet is unlocked," I said, stepping back. "I have initiated the transfer of 50% of the assets to the wallet address provided by Mr. Stone for my settlement. The remaining 50% is now accessible to the account holder." Richard lunged for the laptop. He checked the balance. He let out a breath that sounded like a dying balloon. "It's there," he whispered to the shark. "It's all there. Your share is safe." The shark walked over. He looked at the screen. He nodded. Then he looked at me. For a second, I thought he might do something. I thought he might decide that leaving a witness was a bad idea, but then he tipped his head, just a fraction of an inch, a gesture of respect. "You have good security protocols, Mrs. Sterling," he said, "better than your husband's." He turned to Richard. "We will be moving our funds to a more competent manager. You will transfer our balance immediately. And Richard, if there is ever another technical difficulty, we won't come to the bank next time. We will come to your house." The shark left. Mr. Stone gathered his briefcase and ran out of the room like the building was on fire. It was just me and Richard, my ex-husband. He sat slumped in the chair, staring at the screen. He still had millions of dollars in that account, the 50% I had left him, but he looked destitute. "You ruined me," he whispered. "You humiliated me." "No, Richard," I said, picking up my purse. "I just introduced you to consequences. We hadn't met before. I thought it was time you were introduced." I walked to the door. "Oh, and Richard, the house locks will be changed at 5 p.m. today. Anything you haven't moved out by then will be donated to charity. I suggest you hurry." Driving back to the estate, my estate, was a surreal experience. I had driven this road 1,000 times as a wife, as a mother, as a glorified servant. Now I was driving it as the owner. I pulled through the iron gates. The landscapers I had hired, the local students, were working on the hedges. They waved at me. I waved back. I parked my beat-up sedan next to Richard's Tesla, which was sitting in the driveway with the trunk open. He had beaten me back. He was throwing clothes into suitcases. He looked frantic. He wasn't folding anything. He was just grabbing handfuls of expensive suits and shoving them into bags. I walked past him into the house. It was quiet. The silence wasn't oppressive anymore. It was peaceful. I walked into the kitchen. The granite countertops gleamed. I walked into the living room. The white marble fireplace, still stained from where he had thrown his glass, looked like a scar. I would have to get that fixed. Or maybe I would leave it. A reminder. I went upstairs to the master bedroom. The bed was stripped. Richard had taken the sheets. Petty to the end. I opened the closet. His side was empty. My side was exactly as I had left it. I sat down on the edge of the bare mattress. I took a deep breath. I was 42 years old. I was divorced. And I was free. But the war wasn't quite over. Richard still had money. He still had the company. And a man like Richard doesn't accept defeat. He festers. He plots. I knew he would try to come back at me. He would try to sue me for fraud. He would try to claim I had coerced him. He would spin a narrative to the press. I needed to make sure he stayed buried. I took out my phone and dialed a number. It was a forensic accountant I had found online during my 18 months of research, a woman named Elena who specialized in high-conflict asset recovery. "It's done," I told her. "The settlement is signed. The crypto is transferred." "Good," Elena said. "Did you get the other files, the ones we talked about?" "Yes," I said. "I have the business ledgers, the ones that show he was cooking the books for Sterling Tech to inflate the stock price." "Perfect," Elena said. "Do you want to release them?" I thought about it. If I released the business ledgers, Sterling Tech would collapse. The stock would go to zero. Richard would be fired. He would face an SEC investigation. It would be the final nail in the coffin. But it would also hurt the employees. the innocent developers and secretaries who worked there. "Not yet," I said. "I'm going to hold on to them. It's my insurance policy. If he ever tries to contact me, if he ever says my name in the press, if he ever tries to sue me, then we release them. Let him live in fear. It's a worse punishment for him." The next few weeks were a blur of activity. I had the locks changed. I hired a cleaning crew to scrub the house from top to bottom. I wanted every trace of him and Jessica gone. I burned the sheets from the guest bed where she had slept. I donated the furniture from his home office. I turned that room into a library for myself. I filled it with books on math, on history, on art. I bought a new laptop, a powerful one. Then the news broke. Not about me, about Sterling Tech. CEO Richard Sterling investigated for insider trading. It wasn't my doing, it was the shark, the man in the gray suit. He hadn't just taken his money and left. He had decided that Richard was a liability, and people like that don't leave liabilities walking around. Someone had tipped off the SEC about a completely different set of transactions. Richard was suspended by the board. The stock plummeted. I watched it all on the news in my kitchen, drinking coffee from a mug that didn't have a chip in it. I watched the reporters chasing Richard down the steps of the courthouse. He looked older. He looked smaller. My phone rang. It was Leo, my son. He was calling from college. I hadn't told him everything. I didn't want to poison him against his father, despite everything. "Mom," he said, "are you okay? I saw the news about Dad." "I'm fine, Leo," I said. "I'm safe." "Dad called me," Leo said. His voice was tight. He asked if he could borrow money from my tuition fund. He said it was just temporary. He said you stole everything from him. My hand tightened on the mug. Even now, even after everything, he was trying to rob our son. "What did you say, Leo?" I asked, my heart pounding. "I told him no," Leo said. "I told him I talked to you. I told him I knew he missed my graduation because he was in Paris with his assistant, not in Berlin for work. I told him to get a lawyer and stop calling me." I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. "I'm proud of you, Leo." "Mom," he said, his voice softening. "He told me you were weak. He told me you were just a housewife. But you beat him, didn't you? You took him down." "I didn't take him down, Leo," I said, looking out the window at my garden, where the flowers were finally blooming. "He took himself down. I just let go of the rope he was using to hang himself." 6 months later, I was walking through the city. I had started a consultancy firm, small, discreet. We helped women, mostly wives of powerful men, understand their finances. We helped them find hidden assets. We helped them plan their exits. I was the silent partner. That's what I called the business. I was walking past a coffee shop when I saw her, Jessica. She was working behind the counter. She looked tired. The glamour was gone. She was wearing a green apron and shouting out latte orders. She saw me. She froze, holding a steaming pitcher of milk. Our eyes met through the glass. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just looked at her. She looked down, shame flushing her cheeks. She turned away and went to the back room. I kept walking. I walked to the park. I sat on a bench and opened my laptop. I checked the crypto wallet. The value had gone up. My settlement was now worth nearly $30 million. I closed the laptop. I didn't need the money to be happy, but knowing it was there, knowing I would never have to ask anyone for permission to buy a pair of shoes or a house or a company again, that was happiness. I thought about Richard one last time. He was currently awaiting trial. He was living in a small apartment in Queens, public defender appointed because his assets were frozen. He sent me letters sometimes, begging letters, angry letters. I burned them all unopened. I wasn't his wife anymore. I wasn't his victim. I was the architect of my own life, and the foundation was solid rock. If you enjoyed this story, if you believe that patience is the deadliest weapon a woman can have, hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel for more stories of justice served cold. And tell me in the comments, would you have released the business ledgers and sent him to jail immediately? Or was letting him live in fear the better punishment? I read every single comment. Until next time, keep your eyes open and keep your passwords secure. I stopped at the glass doors. I gripped my purse. The flash drive felt hot against my palm. I had to make a choice. Walk in and risk the trap, or walk away and lose the victory. I looked at Richard through the glass. He saw me. His eyes weren't angry. They were pleading. He was terrified of the man in the gray suit, too. That's when I realized the man wasn't FBI. He was worse. He was one of the investors Richard had mentioned, the dangerous people. The people whose money Richard had lost access to when I locked the wallet. They weren't here to arrest him. They were here to make sure they got paid. I took a deep breath. This was no longer just a divorce. This was a hostage negotiation, and I was the only one in the room who knew how to defuse the bomb. I pushed open the doors and walked in. The game had just changed levels, and I was all in. The weeks following the settlement were quiet. Not the empty, lonely quiet I had feared, but the peaceful, heavy quiet of a dust storm finally settling. I had the house, I had the money, I had the freedom. But a house is just walls, and money is just numbers until you do something with them. The first thing I did was purge. I didn't just hire cleaners, I did the deep work myself. I walked into Richard's sanctuary, the home office where he had plotted my destruction with his mistress. It still smelled like his cologne and the ozone of electronics. I started with the bookshelves. He filled them with biographies of great men, conquerors, titans of industry, ruthless leaders. He never read them, he just wanted people to think he did. I took them all down, book by heavy book, and boxed them up for the local library donation bin. In their place, I put my own books, novels I loved but he called frivolous, biographies of women who changed the world quietly, art books. I painted the walls a soft, creamy white, covering the dark, imposing hunter green he had chosen to intimidate his subordinates. When I was done, the room didn't feel like a command center anymore. It felt like a studio, a place to create, not to destroy. Then came the closet. Seeing the empty space where his suits used to hang was jarring at first, but then I realized I could finally breathe in my own bedroom. I didn't have to wake up wondering what mood he was in. I didn't have to tiptoe around his ego before I'd even had my coffee. I bought new linens, expensive ones, the kind he said were a waste of money. I slept in the middle of the bed, stretching my arms out, taking up all the space I deserved. But the silence was broken 3 months later, not by Richard, but by the repercussions of his greed. I was in the kitchen, experimenting with a new pasta recipe, something Richard would have complained about because of the carbs, when the doorbell rang. It wasn't a friend. It was the FBI. They were polite, professional, and terrifying. 2 agents in dark suits standing on my porch. "Mrs. Sterling?" one asked. "We'd like to ask you some questions regarding Sterling Tech and your ex-husband's financial activities." My heart hammered, but I kept my face smooth. I invited them in. I served them coffee, and I told them the truth, or at least, the version of the truth that kept me safe. "I was just a housewife," I told them, using Richard's own insult as my shield. "My husband didn't involve me in the business. He said I wouldn't understand the complexities of high finance." I watched the agents exchange a look. It was a look of pity. They believed me because society had trained them to believe that women like me didn't understand numbers. They saw the nice house, the baking cooling on the counter, and they saw a victim, not a mastermind. "We suspect he was inflating user numbers to boost the stock price before dumping his shares," the agent explained. "Did he ever mention Project Icarus?" I paused. Icarus. I knew exactly what that was. It was in the files I had copied. It was his plan to artificially pump the stock and cash out before the inevitable crash. "I remember he mentioned it once," I said innocently. "He said it was his ticket to the moon. I thought it was a new software update." They left an hour later, satisfied that I knew nothing of value. I watched them drive away, feeling a cold shiver of vindication. Richard had spent 20 years convincing everyone I was invisible and irrelevant. Now that invisibility was the very thing keeping me out of prison. His arrogance had become my alibi. The trial began 6 months later. It was the spectacle of the year. "The fall of the Sterling Empire," the headline screamed. I didn't attend the hearings. I didn't need to see him in handcuffs to know he was suffering. I read the transcripts online. I read about how his former allies turned on him, how Jessica was subpoenaed and testified about the shell companies in exchange for immunity, how the investors, the sharks in gray suits, disappeared into the shadows, leaving Richard holding the bag for everything. He was convicted on 12 counts of securities fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering. The judge, a stern woman who had no patience for white-collar criminals who stole from pension funds, sentenced him to 15 years in federal prison. 15 years. He would be nearly 70 when he got out. His empire was gone. His reputation was ash, and his freedom was a memory. With Richard gone, I finally felt safe enough to build. I didn't want to just sit on my settlement money. I wanted to use the skills I had sharpened in the dark. I launched The Silent Partner. It started as a whisper network. A friend of a friend knew a woman going through a high-conflict divorce with a controlling husband. She came to me, terrified and broke. I sat her down at my kitchen table, opened my laptop, and showed her how to look. "Check the Venmo history," I told her. "Check the airline miles. Check the IP addresses on the shared cloud account." We found $200,000 her husband had hidden in a consulting LLC. She got her settlement. Then she told her sister, who told her coworker. Within a year, I had a waiting list. I hired a team, a forensic accountant, a digital security expert, and a pit bull of a divorce lawyer. We became the secret weapon for wives who were told they were crazy, stupid, or useless. One afternoon, about 2 years after the divorce, I received a letter. The return address was a federal correctional institution in Pennsylvania. It was from Richard. I debated burning it, but curiosity is a powerful thing. I opened it. The handwriting was shaky, stripped of its usual flamboyant loops. "Sarah," it read, "I have a lot of time to think in here. I think about the business, I think about the money, but mostly, I think about the passwords. How did you do it? How did you crack the encryption? I spent millions on cybersecurity. You were using a 10-year-old laptop. It drives me crazy. I can't sleep. Just tell me. Please. You won. Just tell me how." I sat in my library, surrounded by my books, and looked out at the garden. He still didn't get it. He thought it was about technology. He thought I was some hacker genius who used a supercomputer to break his code. He couldn't conceive that his downfall wasn't a technical failure, but a human one. I took a piece of stationery, my own personal letterhead with Sarah Sterling, CEO, embossed at the top, and wrote a one-sentence reply. "Dear Richard, I didn't hack your computer. I just guessed that your ego was bigger than your security. Password, Sterling Empire 1. I mailed it. I imagined the look on his face when he read it, the realization that his own vanity was the back door I had walked right through. It was the final closure I didn't know I needed. My son, Leo, graduated with honors that spring. I sat in the front row, cheering louder than anyone. He walked across the stage, looked at me, and winked. He knew. He knew everything now. We had had a long dinner where I laid it all out, the affair, the theft, the trap I set. He hadn't been angry. He had been quiet for a long time, and then he said, "Dad always told me to marry a woman who was smart. I guess he forgot to be afraid of one." After graduation, Leo came to work for me. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. "I want to learn from the best," he said. We expanded the business. We started a scholarship fund for women entering STEM fields later in life. Women like me, who had pressed pause on their dreams and were ready to hit play again. 5 years passed. I was walking through the city one crisp autumn afternoon, wearing a coat that cost more than Richard's settlement offer from that first mediation. I stopped at a red light next to a newsstand. A magazine cover caught my eye. It was a "Where Are They Now?" special on fallen tech giants. There was a small, grainy photo of Richard in the prison yard, looking gray and withered. Next to it was a glossy profile of a new tech startup founded by a young, brilliant woman. I smiled. I knew her. She was one of my scholarship recipients. She was building software to help domestic abuse survivors secure their financial independence. The light changed. I crossed the street. I didn't look back at Richard's photo. He was the past, a lesson learned, a chapter closed. I walked into my office building. The receptionist smiled. "Good morning, Miss Sterling. Your 10 a.m. is here. She says it's urgent. She says her husband is hiding assets and she doesn't know where to look." I walked into the conference room. A woman was sitting there, looking terrified, clutching a tissue, looking exactly like I did that day in the motel. She looked up at me, seeing the suit, the confidence, the calm. She looked for a lifeline. I sat down across from her. I didn't open a laptop. I didn't look at a file. I just looked her in the eye. "Take a deep breath," I said, my voice steady and warm. "You are not crazy. You are not stupid, and you are not alone. My name is Sarah, and I'm going to teach you how to win." Because that's the thing about being the silent partner. You hear everything. You see everything. And when the time is right, you don't just speak. You roar. If you love this story, if you believe that it's never too late to rewrite your own ending, please hit that like button. It helps more people find this channel. And subscribe, because I have so many more stories of justice, resilience, and the sweet taste of victory waiting for you. To everyone out there feeling invisible today, keep watching, keep listening, and keep your keys close. You never know when you might need to unlock a new life. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video. I took a deep breath. This was no longer just a divorce. This was a hostage negotiation, and I was the only one in the room who knew how to defuse the bomb. I pushed open the doors and walked in. The game had just changed levels, and I was all in.